6 hours later, Fleet Commander Zelvar Thorn stood alone on the bridge of his flagship. His hands were shaking. Around him, screen after screen turned black. One by one, his ships were disappearing from the scanners. No explosions, no signals, no warnings. Just silence. "Report," he said, but his voice cracked. No one answered. The bridge crew stared at their screens in horror. 20 ships, then 15, then 10. Gone. Zelvar closed his eyes. He remembered the message. The simple, calm message that his people had laughed at just hours ago. He should have listened. But to understand how he got here, floating alone in the dark with his fleet vanishing around him, we must go back. 6 hours earlier. Before the silence. Before the fear. Back to the moment his people made the biggest mistake in their long history. The Veraxis Empire was old. Older than most stars anyone could name. For 10,000 years they had ruled a large part of the galaxy. Their ships were massive. Their weapons were powerful. Their history was full of conquest. They had seen many species rise and fall. Some fought back. Some surrendered. Some simply vanished into history. Forgotten. The Veraxis had learned one lesson from all of this. Strength was everything. Weakness meant death. And to the Veraxis, humans looked weak. Earth was a small, quiet planet on the edge of known space. Humans had only left their solar system a few hundred years ago. They had small ships, small weapons, a tiny amount of territory. To the Veraxis High Council, humans were not a threat. They were an annoyance, a small insect crawling near the edge of a giant's foot. So when Veraxis scouts found a strange, invisible line drawn in space near human territory, they were confused. It was not a physical wall. It was not a laser grid. It was simply a border, marked by a single quiet beacon that repeated the same message over and over again. The Veraxis brought the message to their council chamber, deep inside their capital ship, the Empire's pride. The chamber was massive, built from black metal and cold light. 12 council members sat in a circle, each one older and more powerful than the last. A young technician, nervous and unsure, played the message for the council. The message was human. A woman's voice. Calm, steady, almost gentle. "This is Earth Defense Command. You are approaching a marked boundary. Do not cross this line. This is not a threat. This is a courtesy. Turn back now." The chamber went silent for a moment. Then Councillor Draven, the oldest and most respected member, began to laugh. It was not a kind laugh. It was sharp and mocking, the kind of laugh that fills a room with cruelty. Soon the other council members joined him. The sound echoed off the black walls. "A courtesy," Draven said, wiping his eyes. "They warn us? Us? The Veraxis Empire, warned by a species that has not even mastered proper faster-than-light travel?" The technician who played the message shrank back, afraid he had done something wrong. "It is almost sweet," said another counselor, a woman named Isolde, her voice dripping with amusement. Like a child telling a giant not to step on their sandcastle. The laughter continued for a long moment. Then Draven raised his hand and the room fell quiet again. "Send for Fleet Commander Zelvar Thorn," Draven said. "It is time we taught these humans a lesson in respect." Zelvar Thorn was young for a fleet commander, only 200 years old, which was young by Veraxis standards. But he had earned his rank through skill and ruthlessness. He had crushed 3 rebellions. He had conquered 2 star systems. He believed deeply in the strength of his people. When he was called before the council, he stood tall and proud. "You wish to send a message to the humans," Draven said. "Not with words, with ships." Zelvar smiled. "It would be my honor." "They believe they can warn us," Isolde added. "Show them what a real warning looks like." Zelvar bowed his head. "Consider it done." He left the chamber already planning his fleet's approach. In his mind, this would be simple. He would take his ships across the human border, perhaps destroy a small outpost just to make a point. The humans would panic. They would apologize. They would learn their place in the galaxy. He had done this before, with other weaker species. It always worked the same way. He gathered his fleet, 40 of the Empire's finest warships, filled with the best pilots and soldiers the Veraxis had to offer. Massive vessels, bristling with weapons that could turn a moon into dust. It was, by any measure, an overwhelming force. As the fleet prepared to launch, a young officer named Baron approached Zelvar with a datapad in his hand. "Commander," Baron said carefully, "I found something in the old archives. Records about early human history." Zelvar barely looked up. "What about it?" "There are patterns," Baron said. "Old wars on their own planet. Records say humans rarely, if ever, made threats they could not follow through on. Even when they were smaller, weaker, outnumbered. They warned enemies clearly, and then... "And then what?" Zelvar asked, a hint of annoyance in his voice. "And then they followed through. Every time," Baron said quietly. Zelvar laughed, the same mocking laugh he had heard from the council. "Baron, you worry too much. These are old records of a primitive species fighting among themselves with primitive weapons. They have not even seen a real war. Not a Veraxis war." Baron opened his mouth to argue, but stopped. It was not his place to challenge a fleet commander. He simply nodded and stepped back. "Prepare the fleet," Zelvar ordered. "We crossed the line at dawn." Far away, on a quiet space station near the edge of human territory, a small team of humans watched the Veraxis fleet gather on their long-range sensors. The station was called Sentinel 7, a small outpost with barely 200 people aboard. It looked nothing like a military base. It looked more like a research station, calm and unremarkable. But looks, as always, could be deceiving. Commander Elena Reyes sat in the control room watching the numbers on her screen. 40 Veraxis warships. Massive. Powerful. Moving directly toward the marked border. Her communications officer, a young man named David, looked at her nervously. "Commander, they're not stopping. They're going to cross the line." Helena did not look surprised. She had expected this. Most species reacted the same way when they first met the humans. Overconfidence, arrogance, a belief that bigger ships meant certain victory. "Send the final warning," Elena said calmly. "Again? They already ignored the first one." "Send it anyway," Elena said. "We give every species one last chance. It is not their fault they don't understand us yet." David nodded and typed the command. The same calm, steady message went out again, repeating across all Veraxis frequencies. "This is Earth Defense Command. You are approaching a marked boundary. Do not cross this line. This is not a threat. This is a courtesy. Turn back now." On the bridge of his flagship, Zelvar heard the message play again. He rolled his eyes. "Ignore it," he said. "Full speed ahead." Back on Sentinel 7, Elena watched the Veraxis fleet's icons move closer and closer to the marked line on her screen. David glanced at her, waiting for the order to raise shields, to prepare weapons, to do something. But Elena simply leaned back in her chair. "Commander?" David asked. "Should we prepare defenses?" "No need," Elena said, a small, calm smile on her face. "Everything is already in place. It has been for days." David blinked, confused. "In place? I don't see any ships out there besides our own station." "That's the point," Elena said. "You're not supposed to see them." She tapped a button on her console and a new screen appeared. It showed a wide area of space around the Veraxis fleet's path. At first glance it looked empty, but small markers, hundreds of them, blinked quietly across the screen. Tiny, nearly invisible objects spread out in a careful pattern. "What are those?" David asked, leaning closer. "Insurance," Elena said simply. "Humanity learned a long time ago that words alone don't always stop a determined enemy, so we don't just warn people. We prepare, quietly, patiently, while they laugh at us." David's eyes widened as he understood. "You knew they wouldn't listen." "Almost no one listens the first time," Elena said. "Not until they learn who we really are." On the main screen, the Veraxis fleet crossed the marked line. 40 warships moving confidently into what they believed was empty, undefended space. Nothing happened. No alarms, no explosions, no visible reaction at all. On the bridge of his flagship, Zelvar Thorn watched his sensors carefully, half expecting some kind of trap. But there was nothing, just empty space, exactly as his scouts had reported. He allowed himself a small, satisfied smile. "You see?" he said to his officers. "Just as I said. All talk, no action. The humans are exactly as weak as we believed." A few officers chuckled nervously, relieved that nothing had gone wrong. But Baron, standing quietly near the back of the bridge, did not laugh. He kept staring at his own console, watching something the others had not yet noticed. A tiny, almost invisible flicker. Then another. Small changes in the space around them. Barely detectable, easy to dismiss as sensor noise. He opened his mouth to say something, then closed it again. Zelvar would not want to hear more warnings today, not after such an easy victory. The fleet moved deeper into human space, confident and unafraid. Behind them, the marked border they had just crossed remained calm and quiet. But far away on Sentinel 7, Elena Reyes watched her screen with a steady, patient expression. "They're in," she said softly. David looked at her, his heart beating faster. "What happens now?" Elena's eyes did not leave the screen. The small markers around the Veraxis fleet began very slowly to move. "Now," she said, "we wait for them to notice they are no longer alone." The Veraxis fleet continued forward, deeper and deeper into the quiet dark of human space, unaware that with every passing minute, the trap around them was slowly, silently closing. Somewhere on his flagship, Fleet Commander Zelvar Thorn allowed himself to relax, believing the hardest part was already over. He had no idea it had only just begun. The Veraxis fleet moved deeper into human space and nothing stopped them. No warships appeared, no lasers fired, no alarms sounded, just empty stars and quiet darkness, stretching out in every direction. For Fleet Commander Zelvar Thorn, this silence felt like victory. For Officer Baron, it felt like something else. Something wrong. "Status report," Zelvar said, walking slowly across the bridge with his hands behind his back. "All systems normal, Commander," said the tactical officer. "No enemy ships detected, no weapons fire, no resistance of any kind." Zelvar nodded, satisfied. As expected. The humans made a loud noise with their little warning message, and now they hide, typical of a weaker species. A few officers smiled and nodded in agreement. The mood on the bridge was light, almost relaxed. After all the tension of crossing the border, nothing bad had happened. The humans, it seemed, were exactly as weak as everyone believed. But Baron stood quietly near his station, watching his screen with a frown on his face. He had noticed something small hours ago, a flicker in the sensors. At first he thought it was nothing. A glitch. Space dust. But the flickers kept happening. Small, careful, and spread out across a wide area around the fleet. He ran the numbers again, just to be sure. "Commander," Baron said, stepping forward. "May I have a moment?" Zelvar turned, a hint of impatience on his face. "What is it now, Baron?" "I've been tracking small sensor anomalies since we crossed the border," Baron said. "They are faint, almost invisible, but they are not random. They form a pattern." Zelvar raised an eyebrow. "A pattern of what?" "I'm not sure yet," Baron admitted. "But whatever it is moving with us, staying close to the fleet just outside normal sensor range." A few officers exchanged glances. Zelvar walked over to Baron's console and looked at the data himself. Small dots, barely visible, scattered like dust across the screen. It looked like nothing important. A common sensor error, seen many times before on long voyages. "This is nothing," Zelvar said finally. "Background radiation. Old debris. You are seeing shapes in the clouds, Baron. There is no enemy fleet hiding in empty space. Our sensors would detect any ship large enough to be a threat." "With respect, Commander," Baron said carefully. "What if it's not ships? What if it's something smaller?" Zelvar's patience was running thin. "Smaller than a ship cannot hurt a fleet like ours. Return to your post." Baron wanted to argue further, but he knew better. He nodded and stepped back to his station, though the uneasy feeling in his chest did not go away. Hours passed. The fleet moved steadily deeper into human territory, passing quiet asteroid fields and empty planets. Still no human ships appeared. No defenses, no resistance. Zelvar began planning his next move. His original orders were simple: cross the border, make a show of force, perhaps destroy a small, undefended outpost to prove a point, then return home victorious. He decided it was time to find a target. Scan for nearby human settlements, he ordered. Something small, something we can destroy quickly and without difficulty. The sensor officer worked for a moment, then frowned. Commander, I'm having trouble getting a clear scan. Explain, Zelvar said. Our long-range sensors are slower than normal. It's taking longer to process data than it should. Zelvar frowned. Is something wrong with the equipment? I don't think so, the officer said. Everything shows as functioning correctly. It's just slower, like something is interfering, very slightly. Zelvar's jaw tightened. First Baron's strange sensor readings, now this. He did not like small mysteries. Small mysteries had a way of becoming big problems. Keep working on it, he said. I want a target within the hour. As he walked back to his command chair, he noticed something else. Small, but strange. The lights on the bridge flickered, just for a fraction of a second. So quick that most of the crew did not even notice. Zelvar noticed. He said nothing, but a small seed of doubt had been planted in his mind. Far behind the fleet on Sentinel 7, Commander Elena Reyes watched her screens with calm focus. David, her communications officer, stood beside her, eyes wide as he watched the same data. They're slowing down, David said. Why are they slowing down? They're not slowing down, Elena said. Their sensors are. Our drones are close enough now to start interfering with their systems. Small signals, quiet static, nothing they can easily trace. Won't they notice? Eventually, Elena said. But by the time they understand what's happening, it will already be too late to stop it. On the screen, tiny markers, hundreds of them, continued their slow, careful movement around the Veraxis fleet. Silent drones, built for one purpose, to surround, confuse, and isolate. This is what we do, Elena said quietly, more to herself than to David. We don't fight loud wars if we can avoid them. We don't need to. Patience wins more battles than firepower ever could. David swallowed hard. What happens once they're fully surrounded? Elena's eyes stayed on the screen. Then their choices disappear one by one, until there's nothing left but the truth. Back on the Veraxis flagship, the strange problems continued to grow. An hour later, the sensor officer reported that long-range scans were now almost completely useless beyond a short distance. Another officer reported that internal communications between ships in the fleet were experiencing short delays, sometimes only a second or two, but enough to be noticeable. Zelvar called a meeting with his senior officers in the private strategy room just off the main bridge. The room was small, quiet, lit by a soft blue light. Around the table sat his top commanders, each one uneasy, but trying to hide it. I want honest answers, Zelvar said, his voice sharp. What is happening to my fleet? The chief engineer, an older Veraxis named Corvin, spoke first. Commander, our internal diagnostics show no damage, no malfunction, and no enemy weapons fire. And yet, our systems are behaving strangely. Sensors are slower. Communication has small delays. Even our navigation computer took longer than normal to calculate our last course correction. Sabotage? One officer asked. Could the humans have placed spies among our crew? Unlikely, Corvin said. We would have detected unauthorized access to our systems. This feels external, like something outside the ship, not inside it. Baron, sitting quietly at the far end of the table, finally spoke again. Commander, I believe my earlier readings were connected to this. The small objects I detected, I believe they are still out there, watching, perhaps causing these disruptions. Zelvar rubbed his temples, frustration building. You are suggesting a fleet of 40 warships, each one far more powerful than anything humans have ever built, is being slowly disabled by, what, space dust? Insects? I don't know what they are, Baron admitted, but I believe they are real. And I believe they are the reason we are experiencing these problems. The room fell silent. No one wanted to agree with Baron, but no one could offer a better explanation either. Finally, Zelvar stood. Increase security protocols. Run a full diagnostic on every ship in the fleet, and someone find me a clear answer before I lose my patience completely. The meeting ended. But the uneasy feeling in the room did not. As the hours passed, more strange things happened. A scout ship sent ahead of the main fleet to search for a target stopped responding to communications. At first, everyone assumed it was just another delay, like the others. But minutes turned into an hour, and still, nothing. "Send another ship to check on them," Zelvar ordered, his voice tighter than before. A second, smaller vessel was sent out. It reached the scout ship's last known position within 20 minutes. The report that came back chilled everyone on the bridge. The scout ship was still there, completely intact. No damage, no signs of a fight. But its power systems were completely offline, and the crew reported strange readings from its outer hull, as if something had wrapped around it and shut it down from the outside, like a hand closing softly around a candle flame. There were no survivors' distress calls, but there were also no bodies missing, no obvious attack. Just silence, and a ship that no longer worked. Zelvar stared at the report on his screen for a long moment. "Bring it back," he said quietly, "and keep this information limited to senior officers only. I don't want panic spreading through the fleet." But it was already too late for that. Rumors spread quickly among a crew that had spent hours dealing with strange malfunctions and unexplained delays. Whispers moved from ship to ship, carried through quiet conversations and nervous glances. Something was out there, something they could not see, something patient. Late into the ship's artificial night cycle, Zelvar sat alone in his private quarters, staring at a star map on the wall. 40 ships, the finest fleet the Veraxis Empire could offer. And yet, for the first time in his long career, he felt a small, unfamiliar sensation creeping into his chest. Doubt. He thought back to Baron's warning before they crossed the border. Old records. Old wars. A species that never made empty threats. He had dismissed it as nothing more than nervous rambling. Now sitting alone in the quiet dark, he was no longer so certain. A soft chime interrupted his thoughts. It was Corvin, the chief engineer, requesting an urgent meeting. Zelvar met him in the strategy room, along with a small group of senior officers. Corvin's face looked pale under the blue light. "Commander," Corvin said, his voice unsteady, "I've just received a report from communications." "Go on," Zelvar said. "All external communications with the Empire have been severed." The room went completely silent. "Explain," Zelvar said slowly, though part of him already understood. "We can no longer reach home base," Corvin said. "No signal is getting through. Not our messages, not any incoming transmissions. We checked every channel, every frequency, every backup system available to us. Nothing works. It's as if..." "As if what?" Zelvar demanded. Corvin met his commander's eyes. "As if someone has closed a door around us, Commander. We are completely cut off." For the first time since crossing the border, Fleet Commander Zelvar Thorn felt something he had not felt in over 200 years. Fear. Outside his ship, in the quiet darkness of space, the small, patient markers on Sentinel 7's screen finally completed their slow, silent circle. The fleet was surrounded, and they were no longer alone. Fleet Commander Zelvar Thorn stood frozen for a moment, staring at Corvin's pale face. "All external communications with the Empire have been severed." The words hung in the air like a cold weight. "That is not possible," Zelvar said, though his voice lacked its usual confidence. "We have backup systems, emergency channels. Even in the worst conditions, something should get through." "We tried everything, Commander," Corvin said. "It's not a malfunction. Something is actively blocking every signal we send or receive. We are completely isolated." Zelvar turned to the tactical officer standing nearby. "Sound the alert. Full battle stations, all ships. I want every weapon system online and every shield raised, now." The order rang out across the fleet. Alarms blared through the corridors of all 40 ships. Crews rushed to their stations, faces tense, hands shaking slightly as they prepared for a battle against an enemy they still could not see. Baron stood near his console, watching the sensor readings with growing dread. The strange, scattered markers he had first noticed hours ago were no longer faint or hidden. They were becoming clearer, more defined, as if whatever they were no longer needed to hide. "Commander," Baron said. I'm getting a clearer picture now. There are hundreds of them. Small, fast, spread out in a wide circle around the entire fleet. Zelvar walked quickly to Baron's station and looked at the screen himself. Small red dots surrounded the fleet's position on all sides, forming a tight, careful ring. Are they ships? Zelvar asked. Too small to be ships, Baron said. I believe they are drones, unmanned, built for stealth, not for direct combat. Then why do I feel like we are already losing? Zelvar muttered under his breath. As if in answer to his question, a sudden alarm rang out from another station. Commander, we've lost contact with the grave mark. Zelvar's head snapped toward the tactical display. The grave mark, one of the fleet's smaller escort ships, had gone completely dark on the sensors. No explosion. No distress signal. Just silence. Exactly like the scout ship before it. Reroute sensors, get me a visual, Zelvar ordered. A moment later, a grainy image appeared on the main screen. The grave mark floated silently in space, completely dark, its lights off, its engines dead. No damage visible on its hull. No sign of attack. Just a powerful warship, reduced to a lifeless shell in an instant. How? Zelvar whispered. How is this happening? Before anyone could answer, another alarm sounded, then another. We've lost the Ironfall. The Wraithbane just went dark. Commander, 3 more ships are reporting power failures. The bridge became chaos. Officers shouted over each other, trying to make sense of the reports flooding in. Ships were losing power, one after another, with no visible cause. No explosions. No weapons fire. Just silence, spreading through the fleet like a slow, patient plague. Zelvar felt his chest tighten. This was not how war was supposed to work. There was no enemy to fight, no target to strike back at. Just an invisible force, methodically shutting down his fleet, piece by piece. Fire on anything, everything, Zelvar shouted. Full spread all directions. If we can't see them, we'll make them show themselves. Weapons officers across the fleet obeyed instantly. Bright beams of energy lit up the darkness of space, firing blindly in every direction. For a moment it looked almost beautiful, streaks of light crossing the black void like a violent storm. But nothing was hit. No explosions, no debris, no sign that any of the weapons fire had struck anything at all. Ceasefire, Zelvar said quietly, defeated. We're wasting power for nothing. On Sentinel 7, Elena Reyes watched the chaos unfold on her screen with a calm, steady expression. David stood beside her, his eyes wide as he watched ship after ship on the display go dark. They're firing everything they have, David said, randomly into empty space. Fear makes people do that, Elena said. When you cannot see your enemy, you begin shooting at shadows. How are the drones disabling their ships without being seen? David asked. They're not attacking the ships directly, Elena explained. They're targeting the power cores, small, precise energy pulses, delivered directly to the ship's main systems. It shuts everything down instantly, engines, weapons, life support backups all at once. No explosions. No debris. No unnecessary destruction. David frowned. Why not just destroy them completely? Wouldn't that be easier? Elena shook her head slowly. We are not here to kill anyone if we don't have to be. We are here to send a message. There is a difference between defeating an enemy and destroying them completely. We prefer the first, whenever it's possible. On the screen, more Veraxis ships continued to lose power one after another, joining the growing group of dark, silent vessels drifting helplessly in space. Back on the Veraxis flagship, panic had fully taken hold. More than half the fleet had already gone dark. Reports continued flooding in from the remaining ships, each one more desperate than the last. Commander, the Deathblade just lost power. We've lost contact with 6 more vessels. Shields are failing on the Emberclaw. Zelvar gripped the edge of his command console, his knuckles turning pale. This was not a battle. It was a slow, careful execution, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. Options, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Someone give me options. Corvin approached cautiously. Commander, I recommend we attempt a retreat. If we can get enough distance from whatever is causing this interference, perhaps our systems will recover. And go where? Zelvar snapped. We can't communicate with home. We don't know how far this trap extends. For all we know, retreating will only take us deeper into it. Baron, still watching his console, suddenly straightened. Commander, I'm detecting a pattern in the attacks. What kind of pattern? Zelvar demanded. They're not attacking randomly, Baron said. They're working from the outside in, starting with the smaller, weaker escort ships first, then moving toward the center of our formation. Zelvar's eyes widened as understanding hit him. They're saving the flagship for last. It would appear so, Commander, Baron said quietly. A heavy silence fell over the bridge. Every officer understood what that meant. They were not simply being attacked at random. This was calculated, deliberate, and precise. Someone, somewhere, was controlling this entire situation with complete confidence, and the flagship, the most powerful and important ship in the fleet, was the final target. How long until they reach us? Zelvar asked. Baron studied his console for a moment. At the current rate, perhaps 20 minutes, Commander. Maybe less. Zelvar closed his eyes for a brief moment, gathering whatever composure he had left. When he opened them again, his voice was steady, though quiet. Then we have 20 minutes to find a way to survive this. The next several minutes passed in a blur of desperate effort. Engineers worked frantically to strengthen the flagship's shields and reroute additional power to critical systems. Weapons officers prepared every possible countermeasure they could think of. Though none of them were confident it would make any real difference, Baron worked tirelessly at his console, trying to find any weakness in the drone's pattern, any possible way to predict or disrupt their movements. But the drones were too small, too fast, and too well coordinated. Every attempt to track them ended the same way. Brief flickers of data, gone before they could be properly analyzed. Commander, Baron said finally, frustration clear in his voice. I don't think we can stop this. Not with the resources we have. Zelvar nodded slowly, as if he had already accepted this truth some time ago. I know. Around them, the chaos on the bridge continued. More ships going dark. More reports of failing systems. The remaining Veraxis vessels, once a proud symbol of the Empire's overwhelming power, were now scattered and helpless, drifting silently in the vast darkness of human space. Zelvar walked slowly to the main viewport, staring out at the stars beyond. Somewhere out there, hidden among the darkness, were the small, patient machines that had brought his mighty fleet to its knees without firing a single visible shot. He thought of Baron's warning given so many hours ago. Old records. Old wars. A species that never made empty threats. He understood now, far too late, just how right Baron had been. Commander! A voice called out suddenly. The drones have reached the inner formation. They're closing in on our position. Zelvar turned back toward the bridge, watching as the last few escort ships around his flagship flickered and went dark, one after another. Soon only the flagship remained, alone in the center of what had once been a proud and powerful fleet. The lights on the bridge flickered violently, consoles sparked and dimmed. The low, steady hum of the ship's engines began to falter, growing weaker with every passing second. Emergency power! Zelvar shouted. Divert everything to the core systems now! But it was already too late. One by one, the lights on the bridge went dark. The hum of the engines faded into silence. Screens flickered and died, leaving the bridge bathed in dim emergency lighting alone. The great flagship of the Veraxis Empire, once an unstoppable symbol of power and dominance, drifted silently in the endless dark, completely powerless. Zelvar Thorn stood alone amid the wreckage of his once great victory, staring out into the quiet void of space. And somewhere close by, though he could not see it, a single, calm voice was already preparing to speak. The bridge of the Veraxis flagship was dark and silent. Only a few dim emergency lights glowed along the walls, casting long shadows across the frightened faces of the crew. The great engines, once powerful enough to cross entire star systems, were completely dead. The ship drifted quietly through space, helpless and alone. Fleet Commander Zelvar Thorn stood near the main viewport, staring out at the stars. He had led fleets into battle before. He had faced enemy fire, dangerous storms, and difficult missions, but he had never felt as powerless as he did now. Around him, his crew waited in tense silence, unsure of what would happen next. Would the humans attack? Would they finish what they had started? No one knew, and the not knowing was almost worse than the fear itself. Baron stood near his console, watching a small light blink steadily on his screen. "Commander," he said quietly, "we're receiving an incoming transmission." Zelvar turned slowly. "From where?" "Unknown origin," Baron said, "but it's using our own communication frequency. Whoever it is, they want to talk." Zelvar hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "Let it through." A soft, calm voice filled the bridge. It was the same voice from the original warning message hours ago. Steady, clear, almost gentle. "Fleet Commander Zelvar Thorn, this is Commander Elena Reyes, Earth Defense Command. Your fleet is disabled. Your ships are without power. You are no longer a threat to Earth or its territory." Zelvar clenched his jaw but said nothing. "We are not here to destroy you," the voice continued. "No lives have been lost today. Every crew member aboard your ships is alive and safe. This was never about killing. It was about being heard." A murmur passed through the bridge crew. Alive? After everything, after losing so many ships, no one had died? Zelvar stepped closer to the console. "Prove it," he said, his voice rough. "Prove that my people are alive." A moment later, new data appeared on the screen. Life sign readings from every disabled ship in the fleet. Every single one showed full crews, alive and breathing, though their ships were powerless and drifting. Zelvar stared at the data in stunned silence. It was true. Every ship, every crew member completely unharmed. "We warned you," Elena's voice said gently. "We never wanted this to happen, but you crossed a line we clearly marked, not once, but twice, after 2 warnings. We do not make threats we don't intend to keep. We hoped sincerely that you would understand that before it came to this." Zelvar lowered his head, memories flashing through his mind. The Council's laughter, his own arrogance, Baron's quiet warnings, ignored again and again. "What happens now?" Zelvar asked finally, his voice quieter than before. "Your ships will regain power gradually, once you are far enough from our defensive perimeter," Elena said. "You will be allowed to return home. We ask only one thing in return." "And what is that?" Zelvar asked. "Tell your people the truth," Elena said. "Not the story you expected to tell, the real one. Earth is not weak. We are not an easy target. We simply prefer peace over war, patience over pride, but we will always protect what is ours, without exception." The transmission ended as quietly as it had begun, leaving the bridge in stunned, heavy silence. Slowly, over the following hours, power began returning to the disabled ships exactly as Elena had promised. Engines hummed back to life, lights flickered on, systems rebooted one by one across the battered fleet. But the mood aboard the ships had changed completely. Gone was the earlier confidence, the mocking laughter, the arrogant certainty of victory. In its place was something the Veraxis crews had rarely felt before: humility. As the fleet slowly regrouped, preparing for the long journey home, Zelvar called Baron to his private quarters. The young officer entered cautiously, unsure of what to expect. "You tried to warn me," Zelvar said, without turning around. He stood facing the star map on the wall, the same one he had studied nervously the night before. "I did, Commander," Baron said carefully. "But it wasn't your fault entirely. None of us truly understood. Not until now." Zelvar finally turned to face him. "The Council will not be pleased with this outcome." "No," Baron agreed. "They won't. They will look for someone to blame," Zelvar continued. "It would be easy to blame me, the commander who lost an entire fleet without firing a single successful shot." Baron shook his head. "You didn't lose the fleet, Commander. You survived a lesson none of us expected, and you kept every single member of your crew alive, even without knowing it." Zelvar considered this for a long moment. "Perhaps," he said quietly. "Or perhaps the true lesson here is not about strength or weakness at all." "What do you mean, Commander?" "I mean," Zelvar said, "that for 10,000 years, our empire has measured every species we've encountered by their ability to fight. to conquer, to dominate. We assumed the humans were weak because their ships were small and their weapons seemed limited by comparison. He paused, looking back out at the stars. But strength is not only about the size of your weapons, Baron. It is also about patience, precision, and control. The humans did not need to destroy us to defeat us. They simply needed to prove they could, without losing a single life on either side. Baron remained silent, letting his commander's words settle. That, Zelvar said finally, is a far more dangerous kind of strength than anything we possess. Back on Sentinel 7, Elena Reyes watched the Veraxis fleet slowly retreat from human space on her main screen. David stood beside her, his earlier fear replaced now with quiet admiration. "They're leaving," David said. "No further conflict, just like you said." "That was always the goal," Elena replied. "We don't seek out war. We simply make certain that anyone who chooses war with us understands exactly what they are choosing." "Do you think they'll listen next time?" David asked. Elena considered the question carefully before answering. "Some will, some won't. Old habits, old pride, they don't disappear overnight. But word will spread. And slowly, other species will begin to understand something important about humanity." "What's that?" "That we are not the primitive, disorganized species many believe us to be," Elena said. "We are patient, we are careful, and when we give a warning, it is never empty." She turned away from the screen, a small, satisfied smile on her face. Today, an empire that has ruled for 10,000 years learned a lesson most species eventually learn about Earth, one way or another. "And what lesson is that?" David asked. Elena's eyes returned to the stars beyond the station's viewport, calm and steady. "That mercy and strength are not opposites. Sometimes the most powerful message you can send is choosing not to destroy your enemy, even when you easily could have." Weeks later, the story of the Veraxis fleet's humiliating defeat spread quickly across the galaxy. Other empires, other species, heard the tale with a mixture of disbelief and growing concern. A fleet of 40 powerful warships disabled without a single confirmed casualty. A proud, ancient empire, forced to retreat without ever seeing their enemy directly. And through it all, a single, clear message from a species many had dismissed as insignificant: we do not want war. But we will not be threatened either. Some empires laughed at the story, just as the Veraxis had once laughed at the human warning. Others listened more carefully, recognizing the deeper meaning behind it. Far across the galaxy in a quiet, remote system, a different empire watched the reports with great interest. Their leaders debated quietly among themselves, weighing the risks and rewards of testing this strange, patient species for themselves. But that, perhaps, is a story for another time. For now, the message had been sent and understood by at least one great empire that had learned the hard way, never to underestimate the quiet resolve of a small, blue planet on the edge of the galaxy. It was the last time the Veraxis Empire ever ignored a warning from Earth.